The very basis of the Rule of Two is a master who trains an apprentice to one day become strong enough to overthrow them and then continue the cycle. In order for the apprentice to destroy the master and take their place, the student must become more powerful than their teacher in at least one way. As a result, the Sith Order grows stronger with each new generation, warping and changing the Sith until they have evolved and become superior to the former iteration. But of course, you are all aware of how the Rule of Two functions. But in today's holocron opening, the part of the whole process that we wanted to focus on was exactly how each apprentice managed to overthrow their master. This video was inspired by a comment asking us to go into detail of each way that a Rule of Two Sith killed their master. So if you happen to have an interesting idea that you would like to see made into a holocron, be sure to comment down below, as we are always looking for inspiration from all of your insights. Now, students of the Force, let us begin. Many times in the lore, it is silent on exactly how the Sith apprentice did the deed of killing their master, with many sources simply giving us this sentence, and then they killed their master. But to give us as much of a full picture as we can manage, we will be looking at Sith Lords and attempt to determine exactly how they were killed by their apprentice. But we will differentiate what we know and what we think is theory. And on another note, not every Sith Lord's kill is the same. It was once assumed that each Sith Lord would have to outright challenge their master and enter into a proper duel in order to defeat them at the blade or with the Force in order to properly claim the mantle as the Dark Lord. But very quick in the Rule of Two timeline, this faded from the norm. Backstabbing and underhanded tricks are completely allowed and even encouraged by the Sith. To them, cleverness is seen as just as much of a strength as skill with the lightsaber or even Force abilities. Darth Bane is heard noting that those with a weaker physical constitution will need to make up for their shortcomings in other areas. Bane taught his apprentice, who was smaller in stature, to use the completely defensive form of Form 3, since she couldn't generate the power necessary for other lightsaber forms, but her offensive capabilities were supplemented by her studies into Sith sorcery. Darth Bane was even poisoned by an ex-lover, and he never faulted her for this, believing she was clever enough to find a way for it to work around his own physical abilities. And finally, even Darth Sidious warned future Sith Masters about their apprentice's guile. In his holocron, Sidious detailed how to select a proper apprentice, but warned the teacher how to ensure their own survival. Out of his many warnings, there were these lines: choose someone with more patience and you won't block the blade at your throat. Choose someone more devious and you'll hold the blade that kills you. Choose someone more clever and you will never know your end. No truer words have ever been spoken. You see, if a Sith Master dies, it's actually their fault for not covering their own bases. Tulak Hord was a legendary ancient Sith, a man so adept at dueling that he was able to kill thousands of Jedi single-handedly and repel the Jedi siege on one of the core Sith worlds. Tulak Hord was the greatest warrior in the history of the Sith Order, maybe even the entire galaxy. And yet, he met his end by his own apprentice, who literally stabbed him in the back. That apprentice knew that he could never challenge Tulak and win the normal dueling way, so he used dirty tricks in order to get away with his murder, and this was still seen as a legitimate rise as the Dark Lord. But with that out of the way, we wanted to explain that even if an apprentice does not triumph over their master through a conventional challenge, their claim to the role is still a legitimate one, and they are still considered strong in the eyes of the Sith. Especially in the era of the Rule of Two, when the Sith were meant to evolve past simple warrior ways and become a venom to the Jedi. But with that said, let's get into these kills. Appropriately, we begin with where the Rule of Two began, with Darth Bane and Darth Zannah. The two Sith have a poetic conclusion to their relationship on the world of Ambira, the same planet in which Bane spent the first 10 years training Zannah. Around this point in the story, Bane has been worried that Zannah was too content in her role as a student. Concerned that she had become complacent and wasn't ever going to challenge him, Bane was starting to give up and was going to train a new apprentice from scratch, a female Iktachi whom he dubbed Darth Cognus. Panicking at the thought of being replaced, Zannah met Bane on their world, responding to his open challenge. There, Darth Cognus watched from the sidelines as the master and apprentice circled one another, ready to finally settle the matter. Cognus declared that her loyalty was to the Sith, and that she would pledge herself to whoever won this duel. Igniting both of their crimson lightsabers, Bane and Zannah finally collided. The duel was a storm of red lightsabers. No longer in the Orbalisk armor, Bane had to be careful and measured with his attacks, but he overmatched Zannah by a significant margin. Her defensive form was clearly perfect, able to repel Bane's relentless, savage strikes. However, Zannah never knew just how much Bane had been withholding from her back during their countless sparring sessions. In anticipation for this very day, Darth Bane had never shown his true strength, and now he was going to, leading Zannah to mount a full retreat. She knew she could never defeat him blade to blade, so she was going to rely on her sorcery. But she just barely made it out alive during their initial clash of sabers, suffering from a broken rib after Bane managed to land a nasty kick. Zannah then relentlessly attacked her master with Sith spells, which surprisingly were extremely effective. Her attempt to invade Darth Bane's mind had failed, but a deadly spell which summoned dark side tendrils that could instantly dissolve away flesh on contact ended up being a massive saving grace for the Apprentice. But still, Bane was formidable. Right when Bane had Zannah pinned to the ground and was about to finish her off, one of these dark side tendrils wrapped around his weapon arm and severed it off completely. The pain was said to be so intense that Bane simply fell to the ground. The Dark Lord realized that he was going to die, so he instantly grabbed Zannah's wrist with the other arm in order to invoke the ritual of essence transfer, now attempting to claim her body as his own. As his spirit entered Zannah's mind, the two fought for control. It became a battle of wills, their two identities locked together inside of Zannah's mind, grappling for possession of her body. Both their consciousnesses teetered on the precipice of the void, Bane seeking to obliterate all trace of her identity, while she sought to cast him down into the blackness. For a moment, they seemed to be evenly matched, and then, all of a sudden it was over. What happened next is anyone's guess. It's not exactly known who won this battle of wills, and the lore has been silent on the subject. Officially though, it would be Darth Zannah who would reign supreme, and would train Darth Cognus. However, the Bane novels make it clear that after the battle was finished, Zannah appeared to be very confused. She seemed a bit disoriented in her own body, and she was examining her right arm, the same one on Bane that had just been severed. However, Zannah did answer to her name when Cognus called to her, and she announced that Bane was no more, leaving it unclear the Dark Lord's true fate. So whether or not Bane managed to succeed in taking over his apprentice's body, Zannah would go on to train Cognus under that name. And this is how Zannah killed her master Bane. Darth Cognus herself was a very unique individual. Her foresight and precognition were far more advanced than anyone in her species, and even beyond most Force sensitives, as she was able to look at someone and see both into their past and into many possible futures. But what made her more special is that she possessed an innate ability to suppress other beings' ability to use the Force for a short amount of time. When she was a bounty hunter known as the Huntress, Bane ran into her and even had a difficult time fighting her. While we aren't told how or when Cognus would overthrow Zannah, we assume that she planned it out very carefully by looking at the exact moment in the future that she should strike, and then made excellent use of her Force suppression ability against Zannah's Sith magic. This would have rendered the smaller woman almost helpless against the Itachi Sith Lord. As far as the death of Cognus, her first apprentice utterly failed to even make it as an apprentice whatsoever. The three-eyed mutant known as Darth Millennial disagreed with the philosophy behind the Rule of Two and continuously questioned it, so Cognus wrote him off as a heretic and attempted to murder him. But the Sith managed to escape to the world of Drome and Kos, where he founded the Prophets of the Dark Side. We don't know who Cognus takes as an apprentice after Darth Millennial, and her death remains a mystery, though we do know that it would have been exceedingly difficult to kill Cognus due to her precognitive abilities after which she had named herself. Next up in the Baneite lineage is one of my personal favorites, the Sith who did no evil himself, Darth Vectivus. Interestingly, we never learn who taught Vectivus or who his apprentice was either. His story entirely revolves around him alone. What's even more fascinating is that because he is known as the Sith who did no evil, it makes it difficult to speculate exactly how or if he would have killed his own master. But a Sith Lord is still a Sith, even if they don't actively seek out to harm others. Vectivus would not have the title of Dark Lord if he didn't dispose of the one who taught him. But with the knowledge that he had pioneered the Force ability known as Force Phantom, it's likely that Vectivus looked into it as a loophole. Force Phantom, or Force Phantasm, was the ability to conjure lifelike apparitions from the siphon force energy of another life form and project them across the expanse of the galaxy. By draining the life force of another being, one could create a phantom that looked like them and did the bidding of the conjurer. However, this actually didn't kill the host. The only way to destroy a Force Phantom was to actually kill the being that the apparition had been created from. This was a lost Sith art that we speculate Vectivus may have used to kill his master, since technically he never did it himself and his hands were clean. In the end, whoever Vectivus trained was a complete failure, since the Sith Lord would go on to die peacefully of old age, having said to have died surrounded by family and friends, and not at the hands of a student. Many years would pass as we would reach the year of 550 BBY. The story of Darth Gravid and Darth Gene is pretty infamous. Darth Gravid himself was a madman, one who became obsessed with Jedi lore to the point where he attempted to merge Jedi and Sith teachings together as one. He participated in practices of altruism and peace, while also wanting to be selfish and domineering, desiring to use both the light and the dark side of the Force for nothing but power. He went insane and began to destroy years of Sith lore that other Dark Lords had accumulated. In an attempt to recreate the Sith Order, Darth Gravid either hid or burned scrolls, books, holocrons, and all sorts of knowledge that set the Order back hundreds of years. This was truly the Bane of the Sith. This awful event is what caused the Sith to lose so much of the abilities of the ancient Sith. Gravid raised barriers around his stronghold to complete his deranged plan, but it would be Darth Gene who would be the Sith's savior, managing to burst through the shields and confront her master one-on-one. The duel was fierce, with it costing Darth Gene her left arm, shoulder, and part of her torso, and even small bits of her very face. But while unarmed, the Sith Lady managed to overcome her insane master and would kill Darth Gravid. Darth Gene would later get prosthetics for everything she lost, and would successfully continue the Baneite lineage and the rule of two. But Darth Gene was severely wounded after this duel with Gravid, and it would be no mystery that her apprentice would have an easy time eventually destroying her. The next two Sith Lords we are unfortunately going to have to skip in the lore, that being Darth Guile and Darth Ramage, both of whom are only known for small quotes out of their holocrons. Their stories are never really told, it's just a line of their wisdom which is quoted by Darth Plagueis to his apprentice Sidious. So, we really don't know anything about these two Sith. But the next upheaval that we do know about is Darth Tenebrous versus his Twi'lek master. Now, the Sith Lord doesn't actually have a name in Legends or canon, but because we don't want to keep referring to Darth Tenebrous's Twi'lek master as just that, we have decided to give him a name of our own in order to make the reference simpler. For the purposes of this holocron, we are going to call him Darth Befall. Tenebrous had grown tired of Befall's praise of the dark side's mysticism, after several of his plans had failed, including an idea for a virus to cut the Jedi off from the Force. Tenebrous had grown tired of his master, and decided that his master was a doddering old fool, his own words, and disposed of him privately. This is one of those situations where the exact circumstances of Darth Befall's death are never told to us directly, but we actually have a good idea of how to fill this gap. According to Plagueis, Tenebrous greatly enjoyed a good fight, and would relentlessly force Plagueis to spar with him when he was bored. Tenebrous considered his apprentice to be a master of the art, even if Plagueis thought the entire process was tedious, a sentiment he would pass on to his own apprentice Palpatine. But we do know that Tenebrous would end up training a second Sith apprentice, Darth Venomous, to be an excellent duelist, as stated by Plagueis himself. But since Tenebrous lived during the Rule of Two, where they had to stay hidden at all times, it's unlikely that he would ever be able to test his mettle in a real fight against another Force wielder. To us, that means that Tenebrous would be greatly anticipating the day he got to challenge his master face to face, blade to blade, since that would technically be the only real fight Tenebrous would ever get. Instead of using Sith science like a virus to kill his master, it's our impression that Darth Befall would meet his end by the blade of Tenebrous. Unfortunately, Tenebrous's own death would not be so ceremonial. On the world of Baldemnik, he and Plagueis would be checking out a cortosis mining operation. During this investigation, one mining droid malfunctioned and drilled into a gas pocket next to an ore vein, resulting in an explosion within the mines. While Plagueis and Tenebrous attempted to flee the caverns, the cave ceiling began to collapse, forcing the two of them to use the Force to keep both themselves and their ships safe from falling debris. But in this moment, Plagueis realized that the time was now, and that it was his right to take the mantle. Plagueis used the Force to direct the rocks that he was holding up to crash straight onto Tenebrous while he was occupied trying to hold up the ship. The Sith Lord managed to live just long enough with a crushed lung to realize that Plagueis had expertly betrayed him. Tenebrous even expressed approval of Plagueis' guile for taking him out right then and right there with no hesitation. However, his pride turned to rage as he saw that Plagueis had just jeopardized the Sith plan, allowing the rocks to crush their ship as well, leaving Plagueis stranded on the hostile planet. Displeased at his master's final rebuke, Plagueis reached out with the Force and snapped his neck. And finally, we have reached the fulfiller of the Rule of Two, Darth Sidious, of course, the creator of the tragedy of Plagueis the Wise. This event came after Palpatine had finally won the Chancellorship, and the two Sith were celebrating in Palpatine's penthouse. Palpatine had been rehearsing his acceptance speech to Plagueis, who was enjoying many glasses of an expensive wine. Palpatine continued rehearsing his speech over and over again, until Plagueis passed out drunk on his couch. At this point in time, Plagueis hadn't actually slept in 10 years, not well at least. All of this due to an assassination attempt that was nearly successful, leaving him crippled and requiring a breathing mask. We plan on making a full holocron all about this event and how it made Plagueis an insomniac and extremely paranoid, but his first mistake was here in this moment, believing he was safe enough to have a drink and a nap in the apartment of a friend, his apprentice Palpatine. As Palpatine goes to leave, he could hear the whispers of the dark side, telling him that it was finally time to rise as the one Dark Lord. The mantle was there, passed out on his couch. Moving extremely quickly, Sidious raised his arms and began electrocuting Plagueis in his sleep. The first barrage woke the Sith Lord up violently and damaged his breathing apparatus, which kept him from properly fighting back. This was an expert move, as it allowed Sidious to launch into a full speech, one where he berated Plagueis over all of his many mistakes. We recently talked all about everything Palpatine had said to his master, how it was strangely touching towards the end of his speech. But of course, it could only end one way, with the death of Plagueis and the ascension of Sidious. Palpatine is either electrocuting or force-choking Plagueis, keeping him from fighting back. Eventually, Plagueis would die, Palpatine noting that it was from a lack of oxygen, as Plagueis would fall over face first, landing on Palpatine's floor with a thud. And this officially ends the cycle of the Rule of Two. We won't be including Darth Vader's betrayal, since this is actually done by Anakin as he returns to the light side. It was a method to get rid of the Sith, not succeed them. So technically speaking, Palpatine's betrayal and final usurpation is the last time an apprentice would rise in the Baneite lineage. And these, my friends, are all the ways that the Rule of Two Sith Lords would kill their masters. But tell us, which one of these do you believe was the most devious? And if you found yourself being a Sith apprentice, how would you plan the death of your own master? And if you were the master, how would you cover your bases from your apprentice? As always, my friends, acolytes, and students of the Force, thank you so much for visiting the archives and sitting with us as we opened a holocron today, and may the Force be with you.